This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 672 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, college football fans, the 2022 season is officially underway, and FanDuel and DiGiorno are joining forces to make your college football Saturdays that much more exciting. Introducing the Saturday Slice Challenge presented by DiGiorno, a free-to-play daily fantasy football contest centered around Saturday's biggest college football games. The contest is simple. All you have to do is build your best 7-man roster while staying under the salary cap. Then follow along as the games unfold with FanDuel's live scoring feature. If at the end of the games your lineup finds itself towards the top of the standings, you'll win a slice of $10,000 in cash prizes, courtesy of DiGiorno. The Saturday Slice Challenge locks on September 10th at noon Eastern, so head to fanduel.com/league/DiGiorno-CFB and enter your lineup. The first question this week is from Patreon. It's from Ian. It says, there are so many takes from everyone before the season. What are you most anticipating seeing how it plays out week 1? My answer to this each year at a high level is backfield splits. Like I say all the time on the show, talent should win out at running back, but how a team deploys its running backs is still a coaching decision. With wide receivers, there are tons of them on the field at once. With running backs, you usually only have one. They can't just win and get open in order to see a target or to see volume. So the thing I'm absolutely going to pay attention to most this weekend is backfields and how they're split up. Because there are tons and tons of them that are ambiguous, and we'll get some answers right away. The next question is also from Patreon. It's from Travis. It says, I'm in a 12-man PPR Superflex league with only 5 bench spots. I'm struggling with who to fill my bench with. What positions should I be prioritizing with the minimal bench availability? Thanks. So I get this question each season, and I got a lot of people asking this question this week. So I thought it'd be worthwhile to answer. You should use your bench to balance your starting roster. What I mean by that is, if you've got a starting lineup that's filled with great wide receivers, but might be kind of bad at running back, then fill your bench with running backs. You need that position more. You need more flyers at that position. And make sure you're paying attention to what's on the waiver wire. Even though those players aren't on your team, the waiver wire is still an extension of your bench to some degree. Now, this wouldn't be the case for a Superflex league like this one, but some people have asked me in the past if they should roster a second quarterback on their team. And my answer is, check your waiver wire, see what type of quarterbacks are available, and that'll answer your question. If Trevor Lawrence or someone like Tua is on your wire, chances are you don't need a second quarterback. If it's Desmond Ridder and Kenny Pickett, then yeah, you might need another one, because people are clearly hoarding quarterbacks. But use your bench to make up for what you don't have in your starting lineup. And remember that analyzing the waiver wire can be helpful. The next question is from Nick. It says, hi JJ, this week you talked about Najee and how he will still get volume, but not the volume we're used to. With that in mind, where does that missing team target share go that Najee received last season? Does everything get spread out incrementally between Deontay, Pat Freiermuth, Claypool, and Pickens? In projections, of course. Thanks. So I think it's important for me to get across that part of the receiving-related things for Najee Harris also have to do with the fact that I'm expecting Pittsburgh to not be as pass-heavy this year. Like, Najee had a 14.4% target share last year. If he maintains that target share, which I think is unlikely, then he'll still see fewer targets because the Steelers won't be as pass-heavy. But I'm not saying that Harris isn't going to see any targets through the air. It's not like he's going from a 14% target share to a 0% one. He might go from like a 14% share to something like an 11 or 12% share. But that target total is made worse by the Steelers' overall passing volume. So we're really only talking a few percentage points probably in target share. The issue is that combined with the Steelers being less pass heavy. And when margins are tight in the early rounds, that's enough for me to say, you know what? I might prefer Saquon Barkley. I might prefer Joe Mixon over Najee Harris. The next question is from Twitter. It's from @Vingaz. It says, a lot of people talk about how Higgins was close to or outperformed Chase towards the end of last season. Should we be fading Chase a bit more due to the fact that Higgins could potentially be the alpha? Or do you buy into Chase proving himself to be truly elite entering year 2. I think it's useful analysis to know that this happened. But I think what's being lost with that kind of analysis is that Ja'Marr Chase was a rookie. Chase is the alpha. Higgins is good. I still drafted Higgins this year. But Ja'Marr Chase is one of the best young wide receivers that we've ever seen. Because his second-year teammate had similar peripherals when they were both healthy together last season doesn't really make me think that said second-year wide receiver is the alpha. Because we're comparing him to a rookie wide receiver. That's how good Ja'Marr Chase is. But I will say this, at ADP, when you factor in cost, I did have more Higgins this year in redraft leagues than Ja'Marr Chase. I'm just answering the question about Higgins potentially being the alpha. Ja'Marr Chase is the alpha. The next question is from Patreon. It's from ya boy JD. It says, you killed it this offseason. Thanks for all the work. Thanks. I've seen a lot of fantasy analysts talk about how dumb it is to worry about your fantasy team's RB2. Do you have any idea where this talking point is coming from and if it holds merit? I have theories, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on it. I don't know where it's coming from or the source of who's saying that. And I don't know what the argument really is here. I don't think it's dumb to worry about your team's RB2. But I do think that RB2s in fantasy football are players ranked in that 13 to 24 range. I think they're often overrated. They have more replaceable production than people realize. But your RB2 spot shouldn't be ignored because you could still get 2 RB1s in that spot. But in the end, this is loosely tied to the running back dead zone. The players in the running back dead zone have decent floors, but they traditionally have not had great ceilings. And floors are what's replaceable, which is why we see players right after that running back dead zone range have similar ceilings. That's what we've seen historically. So again, I have no idea what the narrative is here that's being thrown around. I don't think the RB2 spot in your fantasy lineup is meaningless or that you don't have to worry about it. I do think that RB2 production in fantasy football is often overrated. I don't want to draft the RB19 for him to finish as the RB16. That's not a difference maker. I want RB1s on my team. Otherwise, the production is relatively replaceable. The next question is actually kind of loosely related to that, but it's from Benny and it's from Patreon. It says, why is Kareem Hunt being valued so low? I had him last year and he was a stud, RB1 to RB2 on a per game basis when healthy. What has changed this year to make him fall off? So Kareem Hunt is actually a really good example of not letting previous season finishes get in the way of how you view players in an upcoming season. The first thing with this, and something to always remember, because people use previous season finishes to justify drafting a player in a current season all the time, but always remember that there's new competition at the start of every season. What I mean by that is, everyone's healthy. There are players who entered the league that we're excited about. A running back who was RB17 in points per game last year now has more competition to deal with because players like Christian McCaffrey are healthy again. There's more overall competition. The other thing to think about is how we draft and how we view range of outcomes. This might be a little bit hard to articulate, but I'm going to try my best here. You're in the middle rounds of your drafts this year. Kareem Hunt is sitting there at like RB30. And you're like, man, he was the RB21 in PPR points per game last year. He's a value at RB30. Well, not only is the competition thing that I just talked about very real, but people aren't drafting for safety in the middle rounds. They're drafting for ceiling. They're drafting for the off chance that the running back that they're getting in a more ambiguous backfield ends up being a league winner. With Kareem Hunt, it's going to be very, very difficult for him to be a league winner without a Nick Chubb injury, which of course can happen. But he's a flex play, maybe a low-end RB2 without that injury. And we've seen him without Nick Chubb in this offense in the past. It's not like he was a full-blown stud. He was the RB25 in a game last year without Nick Chubb, and in 2020, in 4 games without Chubb, Hunt averaged 13.6 PPR points per game. Now he has Jacoby Brissett as his quarterback for a whole lot of the season. So not only has Hunt not really been this bona fide stud without Chubb, but we know that his ceiling is capped when Chubb is healthy. And you can say, well, what about Tony Pollard and A.J. Dillon? You seem to like them this year. Yeah, I do. But they have a higher expected points per game outcome even with healthy starters in their backfield. And they present more interesting upside if an injury occurs to their starter. Now, in those middle rounds, compare Kareem Hunt to other running backs that you're taking there. Ramondre Stevenson, for example. I know Stevenson's ADP rose over the final couple of weeks of draft season, but let's just compare those two players for a second. From an expected output standpoint, from a projection standpoint, you might see a projection system that has Stevenson and Hunt very close. So you can sit there and say, oh, I can get Hunt later, so I prefer Kareem Hunt to Ramondre Stevenson. The problem is that Stevenson has more paths to upside. He doesn't need an injury to Damian Harris to be fully unlocked. And the same can be said for other running backs in that range as well. This is why targeting players in ambiguous backfields is a very real thing. Injuries can happen, and when injuries happen, the backup running back does get a boost. I'm not arguing that. What I am arguing is the number of different paths a running back can take in order to hit sincere upside. With Hunt, there's really only one path. It's a Nick Chubb injury. With a Chase Edmonds, a Ramondre Stevenson, even an A.J. Dillon, there are more paths. It's not just happening because of injury. So nothing necessarily has to change about a player for him to fall down in ADP from one year to the next. I would argue that some things did change for Hunt. Look at his quarterback. But nothing has to actually change for a player to drop in ADP from one year to the next. Sometimes the explanation is simply competition at the position. But sometimes the explanation is how people view the upside for a player and how that player can actually achieve that upside. This is why we rarely see middle round running backs hit in a big way when they have early round running back teammates. It's because they need an injury to happen in order to be fully unlocked. Kareem Hunt isn't going to outplay Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb is one of the best running backs in the NFL. But could Ramondre Stevenson outplay Damian Harris? Of course. We see it every year. Players emerge from ambiguous backfields. Last year, it was Leonard Fournette outplaying Ronald Jones. It'll almost definitely happen again this year, too. The last question this week is an email, and it's from Todd. It says, JJ, my question is, in the past, I felt like I always had a bit of an edge in some of my leagues because I was better prepared than other guys in my leagues. I devoured content wherever I could find it, listened to podcasts, and always did my homework. As fantasy football has become more and more popular, it seems that everyone is just as prepared, and I have lost my edge. What advice would you give to someone for an edge in their leagues? So this question is something I've thought about a lot over my career. And it's why I focus so much on more than just player analysis. Because player analysis only gets you so far. Strategy is what can help you differentiate. I think the following piece of my draft guide really explains my feelings on the subject. In the guide, I wrote, quote, "It was easier to win fantasy championships without strategy back in the day. Articles on draft day values and sleepers weren't littered throughout the internet. The hardcore fantasy manager had to do their own research. They had to sift through news articles to find relevant fantasy football information. They had to really dig and find late round diamonds on their own. Today, Chuck from accounting, who's never watched football in his life, can find detailed rankings with a simple Google search. And if he's good enough with Excel, he can probably come up with some sort of system where he's pulling in multiple cheat sheets, getting player analysis from different sources. Guys, anyone with an internet connection can find sleepers now. And this is why I've focused so much on strategy and historical trends and overall roster construction instead of draft this player. Because one of those things is a lot easier to replicate than another. It's pretty easy to draft just based on a cheat sheet and a rankings list. And yeah, you'll still probably have some successful seasons. But it's really hard to duplicate strategy. There's more nuance to strategy. It takes more practice to really grasp it and implement it. Strategy is what's going to differentiate fantasy managers over the long run. I'm not saying that player analysis is unimportant. I'm just saying that strategy is what can take you from being pretty competitive in your fantasy league to consistently competitive. I see people on Twitter every day of my life talking about how fantasy football is just a luck-driven game. And I may sound like a jerk when I say this, but that's what losers say. That's what people who don't consistently win end up saying. I mean, I remember in my college days, I would sit down, I'd play a lot of Halo with people in my dorm. We played Halo 2 like it was our job. This one dude that I played with, he sucked. He was terrible. But he couldn't admit that he was terrible, as if being good at Halo was so important. But he was one of those gamers that when anything didn't go his way, he'd just whine and he'd just say, "Oh, you're so lucky." No, I'm not lucky. I'm just good at the game because I've spent hours and hours playing that game. I'm really bad at other games, though, because I didn't play them as much as I played Halo. Are you going to tell someone who just ran a marathon that they just got lucky? That'd be insane. They worked hard at that. They accomplished something through hard work. Maybe it was easier for them than someone else because they have better genetics, but they still had to work hard at getting to the point where they could run 26.2 miles. There's luck involved in fantasy football, for sure. I'm absolutely not saying that there isn't. Just like there's luck in poker. But you could still find edges and increase your probability of winning. There are still ways to do that. So yes, I 100% agree that information is everywhere. And that makes some parts of fantasy football harder to dominate. But strategy is the side of the game where I think there's still a lot that needs to be done, both in terms of people properly understanding it and the research being done on it. We're past the just pick the right guys and you'll be fine phase of fantasy football. We've always been past it. But people who have drafted that way, they're just getting exposed more now because anyone can do that. Strategy is your answer. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Remember to check out the Late Round Fantasy Football Patreon, which you can find over on lateround.com. There's weekly rankings there, Q&A live streams, and an awesome Discord community too. And there's more as well. But thanks for listening, everyone. Really, really appreciate it. Good luck in week 1. Enjoy the games. I will talk to you next week.